Okay, folks, time for a preview review. This is where I take a look at a comic book project that is an independent crowdfunded campaign. I take a look at the preview materials for that comic and I tell you what I think are the good, the bad, and the ugly about it. So today on the preview review is the Colossals. It's a project by creator Thomas Cider Burpee. This is the first in his Ciderverse titles with artist Leandro Panganaban, colorist Daniel Grimaldi, letterer Lorenzo Mazzieri, and character designer M. Ferdi. So, the Colossals refers to a super team of 7 very diverse superheroes in terms of their backgrounds and power sets. You've got, of course, your Superman type, which is represented on the left hand character, and then a various assortment of characters rounding out a sort of Justice League type team. And when you look at the preview materials that have been given for each of these particular characters, you'll note that there was a lot of different and wildly ranging thoughts that went into each of these different characters. You've got this particular character who appears to be a mutant of some kind. You've got another character who is an android that was brought to life. You've got another character who may be the product of some sort of science experiment. But you can tell from all of the preview materials that a lot of thought went into each and every one of these characters. And so that's very, very reassuring in terms of how much thought went into the book overall. I will say that on each of these particular preview pages, you do have some bloopers here you probably want to fix. I don't know what catabombs are. You probably meant catacombs. On this page, malevolent is misspelled. Firefight is one word, not two. And then on Hypercussion's page, you've got although missing an H, and you really do need a comma inserted in the first portion here of this sentence just to break up the stream. And people will criticize me for nitpicking, but I think it is very, very important that you have as few and preferably zero typos in your crowdfunding campaign, because what people really want to know that they're buying is quality. You need to have a showing of quality right off the bat, and one of the best ways that you can do that is make sure that your work that you're presenting up front to sell your product is typo free. Now, one thing I will note about the campaign is that they went so far as to create a theme song for the campaign for this particular comic book group. And I took a quick listen to it, and I have to say that if they ever turned this into a cartoon property, I think this would actually make a very good cartoon theme song. So go over to the site and give it a listen. If I haven't already mentioned it, I will make sure that the link to this Kickstarter campaign is in my video description. Speaking of the fact that it's a Kickstarter campaign, how much kick are they asking for? Well, not very much. Now, this is a 24-page comic. You've got the digital copy available for $8, or you can get the physical copy for $15. Now, keep in mind that $15 does not necessarily include shipping and handling. You could be looking at as much as $20 to $25 for a physical copy. For a 24-page book, that's kind of steep, which is why I'm glad they do give you a decent entry price as far as the digital product goes. You can at least have a copy of it. I know that it's not the same. I know I have some stuff that I only found on ebooks, and it's not the same as having the comic in hand, but you at least get to read it. And for $8, that's a very decent price point of entry. Now, let's look a little bit at the world of the Colossals. The year is 2030. The world has changed dramatically since the cataclysm, and Star Supreme, that's the Superman model I was talking about earlier, and Star Supreme's rise to the global stage. Miracle City now occupies the coastline of a new superstate known as Megafornia. It is made up of what remains of Washington, Oregon, and California. More than 120 million people call it home. Free of the threat of war, humanity has expanded to the stars with orbital and lunar colonies, and even now grapples with a new species seeking to take the evolutionary crown for themselves. Now, let me tell you what it is I like in particular about this world setup. There has been a great traumatic happening. I read a little bit more in the materials for the Colossals, and apparently this cataclysm wiped out part of California and the other two states mentioned, and completely destroyed Hawaii. Star Supreme rescued the coastline from deadly tsunamis, saving thousands of people. And the thing that gets me, though, is that rather than having this turn into a post apocalyptic scenario, it turns into an optimistic scenario. You actually have humanity come together and bond, just as these three former states have come together and bond. And all of humanity took this as an opportunity to improve and to do away with the thought of war and to do away with international conflicts and all the other things that were gumming up the works as far as human society goes. Now, I don't know if that's because of the outside enemy effect, like maybe we found out that there was something else worse out there and we all needed to bond against it. You do kind of get that point with the new species seeking to take an evolutionary crown for themselves. But on the other hand, it could just be that, in the midst of this great tragedy, humanity found a way to come together rather than fracture further apart. And I find that kind of optimism refreshing in a comic book world. You don't get to see that very often. So I applaud the creator for coming up with this setting in which a disaster like this cataclysm did not just become the springboard for more and more disaster, or rather it was a focal point for the world to come together. That's something that I feel brings a little touch of originality, and sometimes all you need to make a really good book is to just add one of those little touches or sprinkles of originality. I mean, if you remember back to Eric Larson's The Savage Dragon, the concept that he came up with was, what if you just had a superhero who was a cop, not a costumed character or something, but just a guy who is a cop and he has powers and that's it. And just those little kinds of shreds of originality that you can pump into your comic may be enough to give you exactly the kind of concept you need going forward. So I like this concept behind the world. Now, getting into some of the things I didn't necessarily like, we start with the cover. And at first, I did have a problem with the fact that Sharkmen appear to be the enemy. Of course, this is more a function of it's just me, because I happen to go through a half ton of shark-based, really horrific movies on sci-fi, up to and including the pictured Sharknado, that just reminds me of sharks being the joke of the week more than an actual serious threat. But I did go online and look up sci-fi's current lineup, and they don't really do the same thing with sharks that they used to, where it was just kind of the shark movie of the week: ghost shark, atomic shark, two-headed shark, five-headed shark. Literally, they had a five-headed shark. And it's no longer a joke session anymore. So I'm going to say that this is okay. I don't mind the fact that the sharks are enemies. We've moved on into a new era since I left cable TV behind. What I definitely don't like, however, is the fact that they look afraid. The heroes look afraid. Why do your heroes look afraid on the cover of your book? Unless your book is called The Cowards instead of The Colossals, you don't want fear to be the projection of your superheroes. Now, this is not bad if you were like doing a volume 2, because you've already kind of had your heroes go through some sort of trial by fire that proved that they were heroes to begin with. But this is your very first book, and you look like they're about to soil themselves because they're facing off with giant shark people. This is not a good look. So I would say redo this cover into something where your heroes are looking determined and ready to face the challenge of the shark people, not scared half to death. That's just kind of wimpy. All right, so opening the cover to the first page, we see this scene that just had my jaw dropping. Why? Because how high up are these people she's dropping out of a car? The first thing that comes to mind when I see this is Death Toll 3. Because those people are either dead or seriously injured. This is a at least a 20, maybe even a 30-foot drop right onto concrete. And that's not necessarily survivable. The fact that she's showing so little care, I mean, I hope there's some explanation for why she feels comfortable dumping them out on concrete like this. Either they've got to be androids, robots, or enhanced humans, or wearing some sort of kinetic absorbing body armor, or else all three of these people are probably going to have head and spine damage that'll keep them in the hospital the rest of their lives. And by the way, this is not the first time I've seen something like this. If you remember Wonder Woman 1984, you'll note that after she got done taking care of these criminals that were in the mall, and if you can't see them clearly, they're right there, falling onto a police car from an undescribed height. And they're falling fast enough that they actually cave in the hood of the police, or the roof of the police car, light bar and all. I'm thinking those guys are seriously injured. And I thought to myself, number one, why is it that Wonder Woman is jacking up a police car? And number two, how are they supposed to look at her as a hero? I mean, assuming they're supposed to know about her existence at all. I think one of her clandestineness was some sort of point in the movie. But what kind of relationship with the police is she supposed to have when not only is she damaging their own equipment, but she's also damaging the criminals that she's apprehending? So, yeah, this whole kind of nonchalance toward the fact that you're seriously injuring your villains, or your initial people who it is that you've captured for some reason. I hope there's a better explanation than just they'll heal. So now we get into a page that comes in the middle of a fight, and it's not really clear. In fact, I've been looking at this page for days, and I feel like I just now kind of understand what it is that I'm looking at. And apparently, this young girl who is part of the team is about to have one of these giant shark people land on her. This is not necessarily apparent, though, because I can't, well, of course, I don't have the previous page to tell me what it is that actually propelled that shark thing into the air in the first place. But look how much there's so much room in this panel to put more details. If you just shrink stuff down and not have her celebrating so much that her hands are coming off the page. Why are her hands coming off the page? Shrink her down so that she's not clipping, for one thing, and so that we can also see exactly what's going on with this shark. I wasn't really sure what the shark guy was doing. Was he, falling? Was he, I don't even know. And the second panel's even worse, because I get the feeling that maybe there's some sort of teleportation going on, where that's the same shark person who's there in the second panel as in the first, and maybe the guy with the sword, who's the day blazer, I forget what his actual name is, he's teleporting her perhaps out of the way of the shark. But that's not really evident, because you can't really see what's going on behind the shark figure. All you can see is that he's chewing her out, and maybe he's rescued her in some way. And then, aside from the clipped hands, and then looking at the next panel is just priceless in how bad it is, because not only can you not see what it is that the purple girl is looking at, you've got the guy who just saved the Spider Girl saying, you can't look away from the fight. And what is he doing? I mean, assuming that the purple girl is looking at one of these shark enemies, the Dayblazer guy is looking away from the fight while scolding the girl not to look away from the fight. It's just, you've got to have your action be consistent with your dialogue here. Now, here's a page that actually was pulled off pretty well. I do think that this whole, cyclone sword that the guy's got does block the artwork to the point where I had a little bit of a hard time trying to figure out what was going on here. But he's leaping in the air, and they're doing this kind of Colossus Wolverine fastball special. Now, this is actually a pretty fun page, and I think it's pulled off really well. In the next scene, this is only half a page, and I'm kind of curious as to why some of this was left off. We don't really get to see in this thing. I can't hold this thing forever. We don't really get to see what it is she's holding back. Now, again, we're missing some pages here. This is not just a continuous preview. And by the way, I think that's one of the things I would suggest to people who are wanting to preview their book is that they don't just do random pages, unless those random pages are self-contained to the point of being understandable on their own. I don't know what it is that the purple girl has webbed up or restrained in her magic, whatever it is. All I can see is that she's got something, but I feel like that scene could have been redrawn so that she was on, a much smaller basis, and you would have been able to see who it is or what it is that is she is trying to restrain. And then the last page of the preview has to do with part of the cleanup process. And I want to focus really on the first half of this page, the top half, because there's a problem here with the panel sequence. You've got three panels, and one of which you've got the Spider Person and the Day Blazer, and they're checking out injured. They're helping the wounded, and they're trying to, comfort and make sure that you've got you've got people getting the care that they need. The next scene, you've got the android boy, and he's doing pretty much the same thing. He's basically carrying one of the wounded to safety. But then, right immediately in the next panel, you've got the android boy bragging about his exploits and recounting to this person whatever it is that he did that he felt was heroic. You don't have any transition between the boy dropping off this woman and then the boy bragging about himself in an entirely different scene. And this is something very, very easy to fix. All you have to do is reverse the order of these two panels, because there's nothing about these two panels that have to be in the sequence that they're in. If you place this panel first and take this panel second, then the interposition of this panel between this one and this one gives an indeterminate amount of time for the kid to make a scene transition. So that's something you have to be aware of. You can't just have a character do a scene transition and, unless it's maybe the Flash or something like that, but you can't just have a character go from one scene to another with no time in between, unless you do, maybe a meanwhile caption or later caption or something like that. Going just from one scene to the next, it's a very jarring thing, and you wonder, am I looking at the same character? Because remember, we're not familiar with your characters yet. We don't know if maybe there's two characters who look exactly the same. And then, what is it, or what's going on from panel to panel? So let me get straight to the praises and suggestions part. So the praises would be, first of all, the characters look very well thought out. I was very surprised by the amount of background material that was available with each character and how different each of these characters are in their origins and their stories and their motivations. I think a lot of thought went into these characters, and that will hopefully play out throughout the comic book. You've got an optimistic post-apocalyptic world. That's not something you see a lot of, and I feel like that adds a touch of originality that is refreshing to this particular environment. You've got a great theme song that'll go well if this ever translates into a cartoon property and not just a comic property. And then you've got a low entry price, at least as far as the digital object goes. You're still aiming pretty high as far as the $25 for a 24-page book, when you can, off the rack, you're looking at maybe $5 for the same thing. But for the digital product of $8, that is really a good low entry price, and at least you can get in there. And then I didn't mention this before, and I think I intended to mention this while I was talking about the page that had the what was it, the fastball special between the two characters. This is a really great art style. I do like the art style. It's got kind of a little bit of a manga feel to it, but it's still grounded in the U.S. comic style that people are used to. So you get a little bit of that, Japanese flair on it without feeling like you're reading manga. I do like the art style. Going into the suggestion side, the cover definitely needs a redo. You don't want your characters looking terrified on their first book. Later books, if the enemy level is such a threat that, they actually do need to look scared, that's fine. But on your first book, you really shouldn't have that. Try not to kill your bad guys on page one. Look at the height that she's dropping them from, and maybe either adjust that or have some sort of explanation for why it is they're not going to end up dead or seriously injured from the first page. Don't let your foreground art get clipped. You don't want the hands going off the page when the character is celebrating there. Just shrink the scene down some. I am used to, readers are capable of understanding a lot of information on the page. If you ever want to see a really great example of how much information you can fit into very small panels, go back and read Keith Giffen's Legion of Superheroes that he drew. Oh God, I want to say the volume is called 5 years Later, because there was this 5 year gap in between that particular Legion of Superheroes season and the previous one. And when you look at that when you look at that particular thing, he does most of the Legion of Superheroes books in a 9-panel grid. You've got, upper left, upper right, left, center, right, lower left, or lower center, lower right, and most of the pages are like that. And there's an amazing amount of information that you can pack in very, very small panels. Don't feel like you have to fill up, the entire scene, or keep your panels, larger than they need to be. And if your panel is small, remember, you can still pack a lot of information into that, at least so much that you're not having to get your characters extending not only out of the panel but off of the page. Another thing is your art needs to clearly convey the action. Like I said, I could not tell for the longest time that the girl with the spider, motif was in danger of getting crushed by the shark guy, and that the guy with the cyclone sword might have been teleporting her out of the way in some way, shape, or form. It's just not clear. And your art needs to clearly tell the story. That is the primary function of your comic book art, is to tell the story. Your dialogue also should match what your character is doing. If your character is scolding another character for not watching the fight, you have to have your character paying attention to the fight. You can't have your character turning his back on the action as well, or else what are you doing? Then make sure the character spotlights are anchored. Now, what I was trying to say in this case, what was I trying to say in this case? Make sure character spotlights are anchored. I want to go back and make sure that I've got something. Oh, this is what I'm saying. You're spotlighting on this particular character, and yet I have no idea where she is. I don't know where she's standing. I don't know what she's holding on to. You've just got a spotlight on a character, and I don't know what else is going on. And this is another example where you could have fit plenty of information in this panel just by shrinking down this character to a reasonable size where we can see, or putting it from a perspective where we could see what it is she's doing, where she is on the battlefield, and what she has got confined. So that's what I meant by make sure your character spotlights are anchored. And then last point was give your character space to change scenes. If you're going to have your character move from one background to another, make a transition of who the character is talking to and what the character is doing, you need to give that character space, either in an interposed panel or something that communicates that some amount of time has gone by, because otherwise your audience is going to get some whiplash as far as what it is how your character got from point A to point B. So that is my review of the Colossals. And now I would like you to go to the Colossals webpage yourself. I will put that in the video description. See what you think of the preview materials there. See if it's something that interests you. If it is, then feel free to get in. And let me know what you think of this review, and let me know also if there's anything else out there that you would like to see me review. Is there a property of your own that you would like to have me review and give you my critique of? Is there a property that you yourself have had some interest in, and you kind of want to see what somebody else's opinion of it is? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching. I'm Mike Partika. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and I will talk to you later.